Welcome to the Fiffe Files. I am Michelle Fiffe, cartoonist, creator of comics like Copra, Negative Land, Zegas, Panorama. I've been doing comics for ever. And this video series, I want to examine the body of work of Keith Giffen, who is one of my major inspirations. I've loved him since I was a kid. And I wanted to dissect his entire career, at least in terms of his artwork. He wrote a bunch. He did layouts for a lot of people. He was the number one collaborator to a lot of creators at all the major publishers in comic books throughout the 70s, 80s, 90s, and beyond. So I wanted to take a close, deep dive into everything that's been published by him. Every bit of artwork that has been in print from the very beginning to the very end. And I can't think of any other style that could accommodate such a look, such an examination. And the legacy that he left behind is a strong one, I think, and it's worth looking at. I don't want to forget it. I don't want people to forget it. I want to take a close look at this stuff. And in a way, examine also the conditions in which he worked in, to put context to his work, to see what kind of things he was dealing with when he was drawing this stuff. So to be clear again, I want to look at the stuff that he's drawn. Again, he was a layout artist for a lot of other pencilers, and he was a writer in others. He was he was part of a huge team for a lot of major projects at DC and Marvel. But I want to take a look at the stuff that he drew. And so I figured that the best way to start is with this thing he drew in college. Galumph comes from it's a college publication. Doesn't say what college, but they come from Little Falls, New Jersey. And he was about, I don't know, this came out in 1973, so he must have been 21 or so. And he probably drew the stuff in here maybe earlier. I mean, you never know, but this came out when he was 21, and he's got a couple pieces in here that are super interesting. Like, first of all, starts with this 8-page right here on the right, which he wrote, drew, inked, and I believe lettered. I mean, that looks like his lettering. And it's funny to look at all this hatching right here, all this mark making, this intricate pattern that he's been drawing throughout all the pages. And that's funny because I've done that before. That's sort of like a trap that you fall in early on, and you just learn quickly not to do that because it just takes forever. Now, just look at this style already. Like, he's already thinking about form. He's putting panels inside of letters and the title of the story. This looks familiar right here. It's sort of like an Agatha Harkness type of character. A very interesting design. Already he's 21. He's pushing stuff. He's pushing the form in his own way. And I can't really see who he's gonna be in a way. I mean, this sort of reminds me a little bit of early Barry Windsor Smith when he was doing Kirby. But this isn't Kirby, and this isn't really Barry Windsor Smith, really. It just has that sort of 70s-ish quality about it. But anyway, this comic, Galumph, is a very post-underground, kind of wannabe early college-age student. I mean, look at this. Lots of stippling, lots of detailed mark making. But another interesting thing about this publication is that Giffen has a second story, a one-pager, where he's parroting Vaughn Bodie in this one in six panel page. He drew it, the story by C. Ward. What's it? Bonehead Erotica by Vaughn Bodie. Get it? So anyway, that's interesting because it kind of it shows the direction he's going to go in terms of not only mimicking styles, but having a sense of humor. Whether it's actually funny or not, that's beside the point, but he does have a sense of humor within the world of comics, and he's not above displaying that in this very serious psychedelic sort of presentation. Yeah, I didn't recognize any of the other names in this publication, but it is a cool little artifact. And, you know, cut to like a couple years later, and its first published work is in Marvel Preview #4. Now, this is the first appearance of Star-Lord. So it might be a little difficult to track down. Luckily, I have a copy, but it was worth it for this pinup right here. This pinup is his first published work. I believe he called Atlas Comics to get a job in working in the field about a week before they closed. Atlas was a kind of a smallish company, an alternative to Marvel and DC, run by the previous owner of Marvel Comics. But they were closing. So he had a portfolio. Marvel Comics was close by in proximity. You know, they were in the neighborhood. So he went over and Keith Giffen dropped off his portfolio at Marvel, left it overnight, and there was no information in the portfolio. So they were like trying to reach him to get him work. I believe because Ed Hannigan couldn't meet the deadline for this particular project. Maybe it was this pinup or something else. Eventually, Keith Giffen got in touch with Marvel. The receptionist was very angry with him. Keith has told the story before, but he eventually got the gig. He got the gig just because he was a warm body who just happened to be in the right place at the right time. And this is his first published Marvel work. Well, actually, this he drew it. This is the first thing he drew, which, by the way, looks very Galassi. It looks very Paul Galassi, kind of Power Comics in a way, you know, reminiscent of Benjamin Mara, in that wonderful style. It's a pinup, but I believe the second, let's see, yeah, this is his second thing that he drew, this issue of Marvel Premiere. Now, the weird thing is this was an inventory story, so it was saved and published way later. But according to Keith Giffen, he drew this pretty early on. In fact, I think he said that it was his second job ever. So I just want to put this aside real quick. And this story is written by Bill Mantlo as well. So Bill Mantlo, the writer, he was his go-to guy early on. It seems like he was just working with Bill on everything. And this is his first story that he drew for Bill, inked by Klaus Janson. And if you were to believe Keith, Klaus Janson saved him. He saved him on this. You could already see interesting layouts, a pretty dynamic range of shots and solutions to storytelling. And yeah, Klaus Janson is doing some lifting in here. I mean, he's really rendering a lot of stuff. You could tell already Keith Giffen ticks, like a Dutch angle. He's good for that. There's also things that he does that are sort of faux pas that I've heard, and I don't really care about this stuff, but I've heard that never draw profiles if you could avoid it. I think other views are quote unquote more interesting, and that could be true. It's sort of like that. But Keith Giffen does lean into the profiles a lot, and he makes it his own, and he makes it super interesting. It's always fun to look at. That's a subtle sign. That's a subtle artistic tick that he developed early on. And again, more action. It's a pretty neat looking thing. And considering the Marvel method, which was to draw it first, you know, Bill Mantlo would give Keith a plot, and Keith Giffen would be responsible for breaking down the story and drawing it and really mastering the visual flow of it. And so it's interesting that it's just jam-packed with tiny panels. I mean, yeah, he's just really developing this storytelling tick, which he would carry on for a while. He's not going to get rid of that for a long time, and it'll eventually develop into his like solidified, codified style. But anyway, pretty interesting stuff going on. Not bad for like a second attempt. Again, this was published way later, not way later, maybe a year or two later, but very interesting, cool stuff happening here. This was, I don't know, 1975. Again, Dutch angle, another front shot. That's another one of those things, a front shot, like a very just standard, direct, looking at the reader shot. Okay, so what I think the first thing he ever drew is in this. It's Deadly Hangs of Kung Fu. It's just this pinup, and maybe this was part of a portfolio or something. But the thing is, this was the first thing that was actually published that hit the stands. So that other stuff might have been drawn and saved for later. This is the very first thing that hit the stands, if the databases online are to be believed. But it's a pretty cool piece. Again, it's got hints of Galassi, hints of Jim Starlin, like this kind of stuff. Little Kirby in there, lots of Perez, like Sons of the Tiger. That's a George Perez vehicle. And he will get back to that. Keith Giffen will get back to this cast of characters. But the next thing would be War of the Worlds, Amazing Adventures number 35, laid out by P. Craig Russell, who is the artist of this series for years, or for, I don't know specifically how long, but for a while he was the primary artist. The interesting thing here is that he did layouts, so I don't know how detailed those layouts would be. I don't know how rendered they were when he passed it off to Keith Giffen to draw. But these are great, and I'm sure Keith Giffen learned a lot from just the flow of this stuff. The extreme close-ups, the range in camera shots, zooming in, zooming out. This is interesting too. The lack of gutter right here, with a space between panels. That's something that Keith Giffen would carry on forever. That's another tick of his that is now showing up. And I wonder if it comes from the layouts. I don't think that would be a layout thing. I think that would be an artistic choice when he's actually drawing it. But anyway, this story takes place in another world, so he gets a chance to draw monsters and weird creatures and weird architectures and stuff. Pretty good stuff. Now, who was the inker? Jack Abel. And by the way, Keith Giffen here misspelled the first, not the last time, that would be spelled Giffin. Happens to everyone. Happens to the best of us. Again, this sort of reminds me of Barry Windsor Smith. Like right when he was shifting from the Kirby mode to his own pre-Raphaelite mode a little before this time. So he was a huge influence on everyone. Anyway, this is a pretty cool standalone story. I mean, again, this is P. Craig Russell layouts, but for some reason it just reminds me of something that Keith would do, especially that extreme close-up right up there. And again, I'm sure Keith just incorporated this stuff. He was just learning. I mean, he was 23, 24 when he first broke in. And this is a very detailed story. Like, this is a lot of work. This is someone who just really out the gate, just trying to impress, just trying to do his best. The next thing we have is, and this is really early works, by the way. This is like the first year of him working. Now see, this is George Perez characters, profiles, straight on shots, this sort of collage approach to pinups. I mean, George was doing it for a while, and I believe Keith just picked up on that influence and just ran with it. Now for this one, Keith was picking up the storyline, actually, again, written by Bill Mantlo. Magazine format, just more space to pack in more panels. And there's the inker is Rico Rival, doing a little gray wash. That is with that's what these magazines used to do. Instead of just being straight up black and white, they would either do patterns or gray wash. It's an awesome effect. It looks cool. Here, it's pretty standard stuff. Again, look at this. Dutch angle, straight ahead shot, few insets. He does it. Keith Giffen never really did insets, but this is a very George Perez kind of thing, but it is a very Keith Giffen thing as well. It's just like he's messing around with the form. He's being, it's very decorative. He's trying to be cool with the layout of the design of it. Lots of very Jim Starlin-esque breakdown of time. It's pretty cool stuff. Pretty cool stuff to look at for this storyline. Now, the interesting thing about this particular story is that he gets to introduce Jack of Hearts. So Keith Giffen is essentially a fill-in artist for this, but he gets to design a major character for this storyline. And the interesting thing about this costume is that it was so detailed, and it's such a pain in the ass to draw. And everyone changed it every time they drew it. So it took Dave Cockrum to solidify and just make the actual the template for what this costume is and would be moving forward. And it hasn't changed much up until maybe the 90s. It was a little simplified, and then it reverted back to this. But this is a Keith Giffen design. He drew this probably thinking he wasn't going to draw it again. He was just having fun. He wanted to draw something cool, super detailed, super George Perez-esque, in contrast to the White Tiger's very sleek design. Anyway, this is issue 22 of Deadly Hands. Next thing is issue 24. So he skips a chapter for whatever reason. That's the way these things are schedule-wise. And he gets to draw Jack of Hearts again. Right here. This time, Keith Giffen and the Tribe. I'm not sure exactly who that is, but a lot of it looks like Tony DeZuniga. A lot of these DeZuniga faces. DeZuniga was one of the many artists from the Philippines who came over and started drawing everything, mostly anthologies for DC, lots of Marvel stuff. They did a lot of work, and they each had their own style. And DeZuniga definitely stood apart from a lot of them. You could really tell in this. I mean, this is just, at this point, Keith Giffen's just a young guy drawing this stuff, and DeZuniga's an old pro, and he's just coming in here dominating what's on the page. So you really can't see too much Keith unless you really look. I mean, I'm sure that's sort of a Keith pose. Now, the thing about Keith Giffen's standing as an artist right at this moment in time, or his skill level, is that it still feels very fanish. It could fit comfortably in spot illustrations for the Comics Journal or Amazing Heroes or RBCC or those kind of things. But it's a little better than that. It passes that mark of like, okay, you're printable, you're publishable, you're good enough, you're putting enough work in your storytelling, and it's clear enough. There's an energy to it, and you could see a lot of growth, and that's also important. Back in the day, people would nurture these sort of relationships and developments with artists. They would give them a short story in a war book or a backup in Action Comics or something. Just something. There was always a place for someone to break in and really develop their voice or get good enough to get regular work, and that's exactly what this is with Keith Giffen. Now, the last thing he did. Well, not the last thing, but the last significant work he did for Marvel Comics was the first appearance of Rocket Raccoon. And this I'm sure has been reprinted a while, but this is the original, because I wanted to see it in its original form. Now, where is it? Oh, here we go. So, again, I mean, this is so detailed. So he's really going for it. I mean, look at that spread. That's impressive no matter what. Like, I mean, you're 20-something, you got this big chance at a magazine story, and you're just going to go all out. And that kind of speaks to Keith's ambition and his sweat equity. I mean, he's really putting it in there. And it's a great looking story. And I think eventually, I don't know the specifics between how they created Rocket Raccoon, but eventually just like shows up. He's just a character. He's in the backdrop of this huge space saga. Now it's interesting because in black and white it gets a little muddy, especially in the super detailed stuff. This is an instance where color could really help make this pop. I mean, don't get me wrong, this is super cool. This is really cool to look at. But if you blink a little bit, it might be a little disorienting, especially with a layout like this, where it's just like very designy. The explosions off this guy's tail make for panel breaks. It's designy stuff, and it sort of identifies Keith's style during this period. Again, frontal views, and then like this quarter view also. He does profiles, he does frontal shots, but also this is very Keith Giffen too. This sort of like 3/4 shot in this kind of, it's a stilted sort of thing. It's very blocky. And this again is very reminiscent of Barry Windsor Smith. That was just the tenor of the times. Everyone was kind of doing that. If you're doing sword and sorcery, you kind of have that in your DNA. But this is wonderful stuff. I mean, just designing all these characters. There's like a richness to this world. There's Rocket Raccoon. It's so cool. I don't know why he kind of stopped working for Marvel, but he started working for DC, and primarily for Paul Levitz, or with Paul Levitz. But these are a few of the issues that were coming out around the same time. Now, I just want to say that my aim is to go in a chronological order, right? And stuff to see what Keith Giffen was drawing at that time. I want to trace his development as an artist, and his styles and his tics, and trying to consider what he was going through when he was drawing this stuff. But again, sometimes stuff is shelved and it comes out later, or it's just it's erratic. The publishing schedule could be erratic and very different from your actual drawing schedule. So within reason, I'll try to be as accurate as possible. So he was doing All-Star Comics for DC. The editor was Jerry Conway, who was also the writer. And this is super important. Wally Wood was the inker. So Keith Giffen has said that he was basically just doing layouts. I don't think he was just doing layouts. I just think that Wally Wood was such a dominant inker. I mean, Wally Wood of EC fame, you all know Wally Wood, but he was his own artist for sure, and he had a very strong style. So he was sort of like the Kevin Nolan before Kevin Nolan was, or like a Jerry Ordway, or someone who would really just, once they ink you, you know that it's them. It probably not to your deficit, but they will overshadow you. And that's exactly what Wally Wood does here. You could tell it's Keith Giffen maybe once in a while when you come across certain layouts. You know, I mean, like the Dutch angle again. I don't know why I assign Dutch angles to Keith Giffen, but when he does it, it's so funny. I know Jim Aparo does a bunch of Dutch angles too, but man, when Keith does it, it's just, there's something, I don't know why that's so amusing to me. But it's effective. It's cool. Maybe it's because it's like super dramatic. It's more dramatic than it needs to be. But you could see a little bit of Keith in this, specifically in these sort of layouts. Again, it's a very young artist. You could tell that he's just packing it in, trying to impress, and just kind of working out his influences. I think this is the one where they introduce this new villain. They just kind of cameoed him right there. See, that's just a Wally Wood drawing. So I would love to see the pencils for that, which don't exist anymore, of course, or a layout or something. But that's what I believe Keith Giffen did. He just drew it as best as he could, and with reasonable detail. I don't know if he drew every single window in this, but he probably did. He probably just didn't shade it in this style. That's Wally Wood's. That's the inker's role back in these comics. This assembly line of comics where everyone does their own thing. I'm not going to assume you all know the drill of assembly line comics back in the day, or even to this day. Just everyone has their role. And Keith Giffen's role here is just to design the page, lay out the story, dictate the flow and the mood and the general design, you know? And by the way, this is a team book, and there's just so much going on, and there's a lot of action. There's a lot of stuff that happens. You know, it's a 70s comic, so it's just very busy with stuff, with plot, with exposition, with, you know, so you're not going to get tons of talking heads. You're not going to get too much character development. Some comics did that, not all of them. But this is pretty much just like a just a superhero meat and potatoes type of comic. And so, yeah, just to move it along, because again, Keith Giffen drew a bunch in his first 3 years in comics. He was just really doing a lot of stuff for mostly DC. It started out at Marvel, and then he was a DC guy for a while. So let's see, who inked this? Giordano, Terry Austin and Giordano. Now that's interesting because that's when Terry Austin was Giordano's assistant. He was his own pro at this point, but I'm sure they worked in the same quarters. This is very Giffen. This right here, this kind of tight cluster of no gutter, zero gutter storytelling tick. It's just that's him. So anyway, I'm just trying to better identify his style in this stuff, especially when he had none, so to speak. I just want to see like the Easter eggs of what would eventually become the standard Keith Giffen mode, which, by the way, changed all the time. So that in itself is an interesting story. And again, it's worth the examination that I'm going to give it. Yeah, so from Cobra to Claw, this is another comic that he drew for a while. He was juggling a bunch of titles all at once. And I'm not going to go through every single page, but I do want to sort of flip through a lot of these just to note his trajectory, like what he was doing. This whole time, he never inked his own stuff. Not necessarily. Not for a while. These first few years, he was doing it all as a penciler. Ricardo Villagran and Oscar Novell. I don't know if Oscar Novell is a pseudonym, but I don't recognize that name. But again, lots of interesting, cool, almost like post-Neil Adams layouts. Just keeping things interesting, mixing it with standard grid stuff. You could see a lot of like post-psychedelic influence in this stuff. Now here, this is interesting too, because it's sort of a silhouette with a bunch of gutters too, but it's a silhouette of a character used as not a storytelling technique, but just a design element in this. And that's something that Keith Giffen would do often. See that face? It's sort of like a Dominator. If you're familiar with the Dominators, it's something that he would eventually make his own. Those are DC characters that existed, that were created in the 60s, but he really made them his own. A lot of jam-packed pages. Commandi, he took over. This is Jack Kirby's book. We all know Jack Kirby's Commandi. Inked by Mike Royer. Jack Kirby's inker on this stuff and on a bunch of other stuff. So this is interesting because, you could see a little bit of Kirby early on in Giffen's style, but he would have a lot of Giffen moving forward, even in his general approach up until the very end of his career. I mean, Kirby was, I believe, a prime influence, just moving forward. Just that's who he had in his system, a Kirby sensibility, whether it be in storytelling or in just the blockiness of certain figures, or just the thinking, just in terms of like coming up with ideas and and trying to keep a story moving along. By the way, these comics are just jam-packed of just ads. Back in the day, it's just you get, especially in the 70s, you just clusters of ads. But it's just fun for context, at least. Back to All-Star Comics. Again, more Wally Wood. I mean, this is really a Wally Wood showcase. I mean, do I think Keith Giffen drew this? No. I mean, I think he laid it out enough, but all that is classic Wally Wood. I mean, that is just, that's the way Wally Wood would draw machinery. I believe these figures were posed like Keith Giffen. That's Keith Giffen all the way. I mean, that straight ahead shot in an angled room, I think it's pretty funny. Especially this, something like that. I mean, that's very, it's just very, I mean, it's not direct, it's not simple, it's very cool. I think I really think that's just what he's going for at this time. He would eventually snap, spoiler alert, he would snap into a very standard, or not standard, but Keith Giffen would sometimes, usually actually, employ a very direct mode of storytelling. This all seems very like just fun and playful. Like he's just trying to mess around with stuff, probably making a dull story interesting for himself. And that's just a trick also that Wally Wood would always talk about, or at least through his 22 panels that always work sheet that he did cynically. And people took it as that's the way to be. I mean, you know, artists take those 22 panels graph as like the Bible, as that's what you should do. And so the story behind that is 22 panels, like shortcuts, 22 shortcuts basically on when a writer just writes a boring story or goes off on a long conversation with these characters. And that's cool. That's funny. It is cynical though, because at that point in Wally Wood's career, he was just over it. And it also, it cuts creativity off at the ankles. Like you're not pushing yourself to create something more interesting and thinking beyond those cliches. However, when you're talking about industrial sized comics making, assembly line, professional comic booking, you don't have time for that stuff. You just have to pump it out. That's why you do swipes. That's why you do those 22 panels. It's not about art. It's about producing product in a fast fashion. Like you have to get it done. You can't sit around and not only wait for your muse, but you can't try to reinvent the wheel, because this isn't art. This is a job. And so that is paramount when it comes to this stuff, especially in regards to Keith Giffen, who was not pretentious about this stuff at all. He had standards and he had his own opinions, but he was a team player and he knew the game. And that's what this was. You know, he was just drawing a fun story being employed, drawing the JSA characters. That's all. End of story for him. But if he could push it a little bit here and there, he would, you know, like, look at that. That's the villain I was talking about. Incredible bell bottoms, collar, very Mr. Miracle. Again, some of that panels within letters, as he did in his college presentation comic. Amazing. Just so wild. The introduction of Earth 2 Superman, which is the older Superman in this universe. And just a pretty interesting usage of shadows. I mean, kind of on the nose when it's like this S shape, but it's interesting, and it's definitely, you know, the effort is great. And, you know, I guess mixed in this diagram here, and it's, again, these comics are just information dumps, just data after data after data, following more data. And you gotta love it. You gotta love this stuff. One Marvel thing. Again, this might have been drawn, I don't know, months prior to publication, but here it is. This time you could see a little bit more Giffen. I mean, Al Milgram's the anchor, but there's no sign of P. Craig Russell. I mean, it's still sort of in his style, but it is very, very Giffen. I mean, again, Dutch frontal angle, kind of a weird thin close-up. Milgram inking. Milgram, when he was doing like thinner stuff, I mean, this is fantastic. This is really cool. This is pushing the design elements for this villain story. I mean, it's remarkable, really. And then in this storyline, or in this world of this character, Killraven, you have evil doppelgangers of the Marvel superheroes, I believe. And so you have like a funky looking Iron Man with spikes. More cool design elements. You know, breaking the figure in half. I mean, it's stuff that he hadn't done yet. Keith Giffen hadn't done yet, but he's trying it out. Again, oh, look, more ads. Cool. Check this splash out with all these Marvel characters down here. Sort of a splash. You still have 2 panels up top, but it works as a splash. It has the effect of a splash. And this monumental head, I mean, it's reminiscent of some classic works that he will go on to work on, like the great Darkness Saga. We will definitely be cracking those open pretty soon. I mean, it's fantastic. Look at this stuff. He's really going for it. And knowing Al Milgrom was pretty faithful to the pencilers around this time. He's still doing pretty thin. Al Milgrom got thicker as he went on as an inker. He was just really lay on those thick brush strokes. But here he's still pretty loyal to Keith Giffen's design sensibilities. I mean, look at this. It's so ornate. It's beautiful, really. And again, a fantastic fill-in issue, but that's it. That's all there was. And then this is the last run of DC Comics that he was doing. Oh, no, I lied. There's one more, Supervillain Team Up, which came a couple months later. But let's just take a look at it now. Inked by Owen McCarran. Not familiar with that name. But looks pretty cool. Again, funny Dutch angle. Full body shot in the middle. That's, I don't know. Does he does that. He does that. He eventually stopped doing that, but that's pretty funny that he just did that. Again, very Kirby-esque. I think the story we just saw with Killraven, you don't really see Kirby in there at all. And here, it's just the blockiness is really Kirby. It doesn't look like a Giffen face. So that's probably the inker fixing it or just putting his own stamp on it. Really, you know, those aren't Giffen teeth. I know my Giffen teeth. I mean, those are Giffen teeth. I mean, that's a Kirby mouth, really, but look at this side. Lots of side. It's another kind of Kirby-ish Keith thing, the lunge. You know, the tackle pose, sort of like that, the battle pose. Keith is he's gonna do that often. That's gonna be his style, his signature style, I think, for a while. We'll see it. Gonna corner the market on that pose. Anyway, we got again Claw, Commandi, and All-Star Squad. All-Star Comics Super Squad. This time it's Bob Layton inking him. And it doesn't look too bad. It doesn't really look like Layton. Layton definitely has his own slickness. You know, that's why he was so perfect for Iron Man. But oh my God, look at this. I mean, this is very Keith Giffen to me. Just the big splash with the big bad, the heavy. Again, this comic, he just lasted for a few issues, and then he was out. Packed. I mean, I guess that looks like Layton right there. The last few issues of Commandi. I don't want to say it's unremarkable stuff, but I think he's just plugging in. He was just plugging in. and he was just a cog, you know, and he would admit to that. He would admit to that later on, but he had more to say later on. So he wasn't treated as a cog. But this stuff just seems like, okay, you're just, these are like C-list, lower rung titles. Let's try you out. And that's fine. You know, he's not trying to say, there's no statement here. So some of those other stories, I feel like he was trying to impress somebody. And by now I think that's lessening a little bit. I mean, who knows? Maybe it was that month that he was drawing all this stuff. So he doesn't have to impress anyone. He just has to get it done. Again, it's not about art. It's about just the work of it. Now, this is his final issue of All-Star Comics. Again, with Wally Wood inking. Gets a little, not simpler, because it's still pretty dense stuff. I mean, that's beautiful. They made a great combination, but really, it's just Wally Wood. This is him. I mean, that's a Wally Wood panel right there. All of it, from the background to the double shading, to the eyes, to Power Girl's face. She looks great. This all looks great. The machinery. Oh, there's that guy again. Amazing. Pretty simple splash page. You know, a little bit of city, a little bit of mostly water. But see, these vertical panels, that to me is Giffen, pure Giffen. That's going to become a trope quickly. Now, one thing about this panel that I was just talking about before, the Superman panel, this 40 years later would become this kind of a cover that, 40 years later, there was the Convergence Initiative. It's a cross-company, cross-line thing that DC executed before they moved out to the West. And Chip Kidd was in charge of designing these variant covers to certain comic books. And what he did was he just blew up a panel from one of the stories. I mean, it's for Action Comics, so it's not really a JSA related comic, but it's Superman, and it's a cool drawing of Wally Wood's Superman. So I don't know. I thought it was worth mentioning, and in the spirit of trying to cover everything that has been in print, Keith Giffen, I wanted to show those off. Are they good? I don't know. I've never read them, but that's when you get a comic for the cover. And speaking of the JSA, before we leave the JSA, this issue of Back Issue, number 106, covers that time with Keith. And the interesting part about that is that it shows one of the pages in black and white, scanned from the original art. There's Keith. Now, there's not much more to say about this except that apparently Paul Levitz hated writing, not the comic, but I think when Keith began drawing, I think he would just Paul Levitz would receive his pages, and it was just so detailed in panels. So much stuff was happening. And I think Paul Levitz had to write it quickly or during a weekend, or he was just there was a deadline crunch, and he was just super frustrated. And I thought that was interesting because they would go on to have a very rich, fruitful career as collaborators. But that's how it started. Just to plug, Keith was plugged into the series and off to the races. Now, there are some Marvel comics, but before there's just one last Commandy. Again, pretty cool. Here and there. It's not that he's running out of steam or ideas. Again, it's just sort of, it's not his own, and that's fine. He had no place to be calling anything his own. He's a plug-in artist, he's filling in, But these are very cool comics to just look at, and just absorb. He then went on to Marvel, or he went back to Marvel, and he did a huge stint on Defenders with these Kirby covers laid out by Al Milgrom, by the way. And Al Milgrom was laying these out in the style of Kirby, knowing Kirby was going to draw them. So those are interesting just for that. But I want to take a look at these a little closer because the inker is Klaus Janson, reunited with Keith Giffen. And this is just dynamite stuff. It's been reprinted a couple times, but to see it in this original newsprint, in this presentation, it's just so good. I mean, the colors, the inking, it all blends so well. I mean, look at that musculature right there. That, I got to say, that's Klaus. That's all Giffen, but that stuff, Klaus didn't have to go that hard. I mean, look at that. That fist is classic Keith Giffen. He starting to muscle up. So is that. That's sort of like center shot. Lots of vertical panels. Very, very of its time. It's still being used, but you really started seeing that a lot here. That's not so much of a 60s thing, even an early 70s thing. I'm not sure who started that craze. I don't know if it was Steranko or maybe Kirby, or definitely not DC. I'm willing to bet it's not DC at all. DC totally had just standard grids for the most part. Unless you're talking about Neil Adams. Maybe it was Neil Adams. Maybe it was DC. Again, we're still in the 70s, so you will get a lot of ads, and that's just part of the charm of this stuff. That is pure Klaus Janson. All this lighting, all this heavy rendering. It's so full. He really fills that out. But the pacing is very Keith. It's very much his thing. Now, this was Jerry Conway. This was right on the heels of Steve Gerber's run, which was drawn by Sal Buscema and inked by Klaus Janson. Those comics are fantastic. I mean, they are gonzo comics. They're so good. They're fun. They move quickly. The art's beautiful. So Keith Giffen took over. Jerry Conway's still the writer-editor. That will change pretty soon. The writer-editor thing. I think once Jim Shooter came on board, he got rid of that pretty quickly. More Janson goodness. Great Keith Giffen layout. Lots of vertical angles. Vertical panels. Dutch angles. This should be a drinking game. But anyway, I just want to, that is pure Janson. The pencils there were probably just 2 dots, to be honest. That's just, Janson did this with Miller, with just everyone, he with Gil Kane. And that's Frank Miller, in case you didn't know. Fantastic work. This Defenders run is underrated, but it's full of great visuals. Now, this is when Roger Slifer and David Anthony Kraft started writing. Really, it went to David Anthony Kraft. But that became the dominant team moving forward, at least for a stretch. Great splash panel. Good Lord. Very impressive stuff. Starts off strong. Lots of character stuff. Lots of subplots. Again, because this is Marvel style, Keith Giffen probably just went home and drew this on his own, not knowing what the dialogue was going to be, and just decided to do stuff like this. That's the flashback. Here's a profile going into a panel. That's something he would do often. It's great. It kind of calls back to that magazine we just looked at. Drawing Captain America, which is a rarity. He rarely drew Captain America, even though he really wanted to have a Captain America project. One almost happened, but it fell through. But there had been a handful of times where he drew Captain America or Captain America adjacent characters or versions of Captain America. So this is really interesting to me, just as just personal, just knowing that he was a huge fan of this character and never got to work with him. Keith worked on almost everyone. So the fact that he didn't do Captain America is our loss. I'm sure he would have had fun with it. Oh, look, more ads. That's cool. Vertical panels, Dutch angles. I mean, what is not to love? Here's some more Milgram Kirby covers. Again, still with Janson. Janson stuck out, huh? Stuck it out with this title. I'm sure he was in demand. He was just a worker bee, just trying to hustle. All these guys were young. They were just trying to make a name for themselves. You know, Terry Austin was doing the other stuff. He was just up and coming. I mean, great last page. Again with the letters as panels. Klaus Janson hanging in there. I mean, good Lord, look. Got double lighting and a Dutch panel. I mean, and then this is sort of what I meant by, like, it's not full figure, but it's sort of like a figure shot, but they are facing one another. It's very straight ahead. It's very standard, but it works. It's almost like putting something straight in the middle. You know, in a design sense, you want to have something off center, but if you center it, you have to mean it, and it has to work. And Keith Giffen does that so many times. So we have Scorpio. That's a big bad for this team. I believe that's a Steranko creation. And so, you know, big fight ensues. It's a group book. I mean, not to go too quickly. Hold on a second. I want to drink that in. I mean, that's so good. And it looks like Janson without the Janson overload that you've been getting. It's still very, very much Klaus. Classic Elf with a Gun scene for those in the know. That was just an inside joke that started with Steve Gerber, and they carried it on and on and on. It was a sort of mystery that ran through this book. Keith and Klaus. They've done it again. Again, more super heroics, you know, just moving stuff along, you know, month in, month out. Who shows up? Wonder Man shows up. Some backstory. Very Klaus. That might as well be Matt Murdock or Foggy Nelson, drawn by Miller. This layout, that to me is like Keith Giffen-ish. Sometimes he snaps back into that sort of grid. All right, issue 48. We got a new inker by the name of Dan Green, who you might know as Mark Silvestri's inker in the 90s. But here, he looks very different to me. He's still very polished. This is very Kirby. I mean, he amps up the Kirby. Dan Green does. And maybe he just sees faithful to the Kirbiness in Keith Giffen stuff, but this really reads as Barry Windsor Smith during the Kirby years, which, by the way, is excellent. If you haven't seen that stuff, I'm sure he hates it, but who doesn't hate their own work, their own early days? But that stuff is fun to look at. It's just really bizarre stuff in service of superhero comics in the late 60s. And that's what this reminds me of. It's just soap opera in the 70s. And then you get this really detailed shot, which is reminiscent of what Juan Bobillo would later do with, I forget the inker's name, but this is not Juan Bobillo. Who am I thinking of? Ladron. That's who I'm thinking of. I can't believe I just forgot that on air too. Please disregard that comment. Anyway, it's pretty good stuff. Again, very Kirby-ish. Nice double splash page right there. You know, lots of tech. He drew his ass off. It looks great. It's effective. For the story, it's very effective. It stands on its own too. I love these ads, but not all the time. One more Marvel thing that's not Defenders. Keith Giffen drew all these profiles of Hulk villains, his foes. It's a quick, cool little thing. He did. Just a handful of pieces. Pretty interesting stuff. Yeah, again, Keith Giffen with an I. But he inked it. I don't know if he did the gray tones though. I don't know. So look for this Starland cover. It's good stuff. Supervillain team up. One more. Again, very. I mean, do I got to say it's very Giffenish? I mean, not very Kirby-ish. You know, it's great, tight, slick inking by Don Perlin. Don Perlin, who I don't think of as an inker. He was a veteran. He actually ended up drawing the Defenders towards the end, and then becoming a penciler at Valiant, or art director and penciler. Amazing. What a striking splash page. Goodness. I don't know. If anything, it's indicative of Keith's flexibility and in his maybe interest levels, which I think he was a very emotional creator. And by that, I mean that if he wasn't feeling it, you're going to tell, and he's going to bail. I mean, he's not going to give you substandard work, but he won't last long. If he finds it boring, or if it's not selling, or if just something's not clicking, he's out of there. This is sort of a classic splash page. I always see it shared whenever this run is cited. It's a great splash page. I mean, it's almost Kirby by way of Friends, what Ron Friends would eventually become. You know, it's this sort of symbolic cityscape. It's almost like if the city were a language, right? Like this is just, it's so organic in this weird way. Great machinery. And when I please forgive me, I hate comparing artists to other artists, but this is just to give it some sort of sense of placement, of style, tree. You know, there's a Venn diagram of stuff, and most artists have, all artists have, especially in comic books. It's just, to me, it's interesting. It's not a judgment call. I'm not devaluing the worth of an artist by comparing it to other styles. I do that to myself all the time. I do it to others. And it's a way to just break down what I like about this stuff and what I find interesting about it in specific issues or particular panels or pages. And so when I say something like, this is very Ledron, who would draw something like this 30 years after this, I'm just trying to put it in that sort of context for myself. And it's just fun. It's just fun for me to identify things like that. Is that big profile? Again, one of the faux pas that he just leaned into. Keith Giffen leaned into that. Nice design right there. A little flashback scene. Doesn't have to be boring. Doesn't have to be dull. Doesn't have to be standard. Especially especially here when he does go back to a standard sort of format. So he's picking his moments. You know, he's choosing the right moment to do that sort of thing. You know, if the whole thing was like that, it might lessen its punch. But he's not. He's picking his moments. Great Kirby-esque 4-panel thing, which, by the way, the 4-panel layout is not that it's not common, but you don't really see it as often. Another faux pas. I know people are like, do something a little bit more than that, but I personally love this. I've used it a couple times as a penciler, as a doing my layouts for my comics. I feel like these pages are going to rip, even just flipping through it. You know what I mean? But really, I mean, there's no other better delivery system than just this. So I will try to be delicate, but I am getting excited about this stuff. You understand. Great splash page. Issue 50, big, fantastic 50th issue. Introducing the Zodiac, the new Zodiac. Where's Taurus? Where are you? Oh, man, that's Taurus? All right. That's fine. I don't think I recognize him. I like the old Taurus better, to be honest. This is a big climax of bad guys versus good guys. Again, it's comic book 101. This is the big money shot. This is the big double splash page, right? It will be interesting to see in other formats, such as this one, which is the Treasury edition size. And there it is. This is the biggest it will be. And just to compare the sizes, there you go. But the printing here is a lot crisper. The colors pop a little bit more. You get a little bit of gutter loss here, but that's okay. It's still a cool ass drawing, but huge. And then this is the standard, right? And then let's see. Then here, in this Jack Kirby collector, there it is again, just smaller and in black and white. So you could, I mean, the details are lost a little bit, but it's still cool to see it in stark black and white. So this is somewhat of an iconic shot. I mean, it's been reprinted so many times. This is just a pinup right in the middle of this otherwise Ross Andrew drawn story. And it was just a pinup. So, I mean, they recognized that it was cool. Great Gil Kane back cover, by the way. And cover. Inked by a young Bob Wyachuk. Anyway, Defenders 50. It was almost the end of Keith Giffen's run. Do I believe that he drew this? I'm not sure. Gun to my head, maybe the heads. I don't think he drew that house. But he might have. He might have had it in him to draw that. To squeeze a map of a barn in the middle of his insane schedule. Why not? The readers had to know what was in that barn. Oh yeah, this is a very very delicate storyline. At least the ending of that story. Okay, so this is it. Home stretch with Marvel and the break that we will be talking about. Klaus Janson is back. He's back, baby. Look at that. He's bringing it too. Never lost it. Still hasn't. It's 2025. Still hasn't lost it. But over Keith Giffen, it looks great. All right, nothing big happens in this issue. So, and again, I don't want to leaf through every single thing, but I do want to give you a taste of this stuff. Now, this is going to be interesting because this is Keith Giffen on his way out of Marvel. Who is inking this? Chick Stone, old school Marvel artist. Chick Stone. I mean, that's a great neck punch right there. I mean, that's fantastic. I mean, it's very kinetic. It's very, look at this. Great flow of action. All throughout. I notice he's employing the 4-panel grid for these big fight scenes or fight moments. Chick Stone is changing a couple of things here. He's polishing up a couple of faces. That's a Keith Giffen. That's very Keith Giffen. I mean, that sort of lower face. Look at this profile. Do you see what I mean when I mean the profile? Like he really leans into the profile as a solution. And don't get me wrong, I'm all for it. I love that approach. I think if you could pull it off, why not? By the way, that punch would crush his skull, but whatever. I mean, I don't really care. I think it looks great. Okay, so this is it. This is when this has a bunch of artists, among them Michael Golden and Dave Cockrum. So I think I could identify the Keith Giffen pages, like, because of, yeah, you guessed it, Dutch angle frontal shot. Big hand. I mean, that is hilarious. That is such a hilarious approach to that. I mean, that is Kirby-ish, but like that is Power Comics right there. That is 100% Power Comics. Back to Golden. I mean, not Back to Golden. I believe that is Dave Cockrum. That's Golden. That's Golden. Right? Thin vertical panels. That's definitely Giffen. This sort of frontal shot. There's something specific about his frontal shots that are just uniquely his. I can't really identify why. Take note, this character is called Lunatic. There's more about him and his connection to Lobo. More Michael Golden. That's got to be Keith Giffen. It has to be. It has to be. Now, let's look at this page real quick, because in this issue of Foom, the Defenders issue, which, by the way, this double cover influenced the cover of Coper number 7, plug. But I've always loved this cover. It's so good. Here we get to see Keith Giffen pencils. That's such a rarity. I mean, I can't tell you how unique this is to see his pencil work, especially from this era. This is fantastic. Now here, what happened is Keith Giffen drew the story, Marvel style, just drew based on a plot, presumably from David Anthony Kraft, sent it in, and it was either denied or he quit. But Michael Golden redrew it. So this is the original, and this is what was printed. That's what it's somewhere in here. Oh no, sorry. It was this. I mean, that did happen there, but it's this story right here. See it right there? This is what Keith Giffen did. I'll try to blow that up later so you could really take a look at that. But it's just interesting to see the difference of approach between those two artists, especially, I mean, of all artists, Michael Golden, he's gonna out illustrate anyone from this generation and beyond. I mean, this guy, this is his very early work, and he already has the goods to stand out. And Michael Golden, that's his own story. He doesn't come from Kirby, doesn't come from Ditko. He's his own self-realized visualist. And to have him redraw this page is curious. You know, I am wondering if the editor, Tom DeFalco, thought or was underwhelmed by Keith Giffen's results, and maybe that led to Keith leaving. But I don't know. Maybe someone should ask Tom. I doubt he remembers, because who cares? This stuff happened decades ago. And this is just stuff that needed to be done in and out, you know? Real quick, and I'll go way quicker on this because there is a lot. But Keith Giffen stopped working right after this chunk that I'm going to talk about right here. He stopped working. I think he ran into deadline problems, and he just kind of quit in a huff, working for DC Comics. He left people in a lurch. Actually, this is the very, very last issue that Keith drew of Defenders. That's his layout. That I believe that's him. But again, early Michael Golden took care of the other pages. But you could tell that, see, that's a Michael Golden Hulk. That's a Keith Giffen Hulk. See that sort of like front sort of charging pose. It's just curious why he left. That's never been recorded specifically why. There was David Anthony Kraft would later ask him or tell him that there was a rumor that he was on drugs, that he was in jail. None of those were true as far as I know. But during this last stint, he would just, he drew some challengers, some claw, and again, suit. It was good stuff. Look at that. He cornered the market on this profile as backdrop to panel flashback sequence. They're very wild designs and layouts. Joe Staten, shout out. Joe Staten was one of his contemporaries, one of his peers. You see a lot of Joe Staten in this stuff. Beautiful, trying to channel Neil Adams in a way. Very, very Giffen and grotesque. This looks like Alex Nino or something. Who inked this? Redondo? No, John Salardo. This gets into sword and sorcery territory. And you could, again, he's really going for broke. So I don't know. Again, it's not like he's phoning it in. I don't know what the story is there. Very, very, this is all very Neil Adams. So it's interesting to see him channel Neil Adams when he normally never did. Great splash page. Little fight scene. That's a very playful fight scene, I think. Utilizing letters, the lettering, the SFX. These claw books are fine. And I know you see that Iron Man, but we'll get to that in a minute. Dutch, Side, Carnage. It's great. It's great. Talk about Barry Windsor Smith. He's really trying to go for that, I guess. It's so heavy. This is the second example of Keith Giffen drawing Captain America. Again, Bruce D. I take it as Bruce D. Patterson. Patterson, who would go on to ink him later on. This must have been an inventory story because, again, if he was out of Marvel at that point, they just pulled this from the files. It's interesting looking just to see him draw Marvel characters, but primarily Captain America. That charge pose that he's famous for. This kind of side, it's very cartoony in a weird way to see like a body being flung off panel. That to me is more like Looney Tunes than Jack Kirby, but it's very, very effective. It tells the story. It gives the impact. It's not funny, but I think it has comedic roots. And he did that for a while. Again, he would have drawn a badass Captain America. Good Lord. That would have been so cool. Okay, so he did draw Jack of Hearts one more time, inked by Rudy Niebers, who I'm sure hated drawing this, having to ink this character in his very rendered style. Oh, there you go. That's the Dave Cockrum style guide that I was talking about. He finalized that design for this character. Pretty decent splash page, Not the whole body, but that's fine. Hey, Keith is on his way out, man. He doesn't have to do anything. He drew this back cover for the Comics Reader, number 164, which was a fanzine that Paul Levitz took over publishing for a while, and then he handed it off, but it became sort of a trade magazine that's mostly just listings for future comics. So it's not even like the Comics Journal in that it had interviews or reviews. It's just like a big checklist, but it has cool covers and back covers. And he created this character, I believe colored it, but definitely inked it. So that's a rare Keith Giffen inked thing. And then so this is 1978. Yeah, 1979. He probably drew it in 78. These came out later, but these must have been the very last things that he drew for Marvel. Danny Bulanati inking him. Greg LaRocque drew the pages, the bookend pages, but this is all Giffen. A rare Giffen drawing. You know what? I don't think Giffen drew Nightcrawler. These are all Greg LaRocque looking. You know, Giffen drew that, but I think Greg LaRocque, this must have been another character. I mean, this is an inventory story all the way. I mean, it's a kind of a fluff and, you know, fill in. And this was just unearthed when they just needed to fill something in, to just plug something into the schedule because it was running behind. Not too many Giffinisms. Danny Bulanati again overpowers him in a weird way. But the thing is this: he stopped doing comics for about 2 years. He worked as a repo man. He worked. I forget what else he did. He worked and he sold Kirby vacuum cleaners door to door for about 2 years. He actually Keith Giffen had a podcast. I think it had a handful of episodes on YouTube where in one of the episodes he talks about one of his jobs, which was transporting toxic waste and monkeys. So I recommend you check that out. But my point is he stopped working for about 2 years. And then his wife, she took it upon herself to make an appointment with Joe Orlando. I believe she called Joe Orlando and made an appointment. And Keith Giffen was persona non grata at DC and Marvel. And so Joe Orlando was very cautious, but he was just fine. He just booked an appointment. And Keith came in with his portfolio and started getting work. But they were like walking on thin ice. He was on thin ice because, again, I don't know what happened when he left. I've heard John Romita say somewhere that Keith Giffen would beat himself up with a brick and get all bloody and come in and blame being mugged on his lateness. And that's why he couldn't turn in a certain job. So it's that kind of stuff. So I don't know if he was just like messing around or not taking it seriously, or he was just bad at deadlines. All that stuff is not very clear, but he got a second shot 2 years later. And it was with these sort of stories, you know, again, the anthology books, the mystery, the ghosts, the war books, they all had a place for newbies, for people just cutting their teeth, and for Keith to have a second chance at this stuff. So they were like, all right, we'll give you some work. We'll give you some backups. And so this was what, 82, 83. So it did take a couple years for him to just, recalibrate or reconfigure his life and stuff. But there he is, inked by John Solardo. Just very Prince Valiant looking, just, it's fine work if you could get it. And he got it, you know, he got it. And I don't know what his thinking was, whatever bothered him about the first run. He was very apologetic. That's the sense I got. He was very embarrassed about that time in comics, or his attitude, his behavior with editorial and his collaborators. He recognized that wasn't fair, that wasn't cool. And so I think he came into this thinking, okay, this is serious now. I'm going to apply myself. I've been given a chance. I've been probably blacklisted at Marvel. They hate me over there. So luckily I got Joe Orlando to get behind me and employ me. I'm on my best behavior. And so he started doing this stuff. Now, the previous thing you saw, that wasn't too Keith Giffen. This is totally Keith Giffen. I mean, John Beatty, a young inker at the time, really giving it that polish. Very cool, very grotesque type of stuff, very sci-fi ish. Again, all these are short stories. They range from 6 to 8 pages. They're given to just different people of different skill sets, old veterans, new rookies. Here's your Keith Giffen with Sam Granger inking. Very cool stuff. Had to draw horses. I mean, talk about penance, Look at that profile. I'm telling you, you'll never look at a profile the same way again. He does profiles. That's what he does. You'll notice not many people do that because they've been told not to. They've been lied to. What's wrong with a profile? In here, you will find an ad for Dr. Fate. In this issue, you'll find that same ad, but bigger. Here it is for comparison size. These are the little digest books that DC used to put out. Marvel used to do them as well, but no one like DC. I mean, and this will obliterate your vision if you try reading this. So don't bother. Just get it for the art. I mean, I got it for an ad in the back, This is where it started. This is where Keith Giffen got his second chance for real. Mike Barr, well, it wasn't Mike Barr. It was a bunch of different editors and writers. Mike Barr was the editor. Martin Pasco wrote this story, but it was a backup in the Flash. It was a serialized backup. Similar to Walt Simonson and Archie Goodwin's Manhunter in the back of Detective Comics. This stuff happened all the time in DC Comics. Now, drink this in. I mean, look at this. This is full force Larry Malstead inking him, who will become a long-standing collaborator with Keith. I mean, this is like really George Perez, Starlin, Galassi on steroids. He's really going for it. But it's still him. It's still very much Giffen, Starts off pretty steady. Marty Pasco, great writer. Rest in peace. This was also reprinted in The Immortal Dr. Fate, which you will tell the difference from not only the coloring, but the actual printing of the stuff. This is the Baxter edition. And Baxter is, to me, for my money, the best printing ever. I mean, it still holds up. Look at how crisp the ink line is, the colors, how they pop. This, to me, is like the platonic ideal of a comic book. And I say that in this year where there are so many different versions and formats to comic books. I don't care. This is perfect. This is the perfect unit of information and art. Now, it's a little garish. But the printing is just so unbeatable, and this looks so muddy in comparison. I don't mind it. I don't mind. I like having both. A lot of the stuff in the mid 80s was reprinted. A lot of classic storylines like the Marshall Rogers Batman stuff, the Neil Adams Green Lantern stuff. But again, this was the presentation of the times. You know what? I'm jumping ahead, but just real quick, another comparison side by side. I mean, look at this. The one on the right is the Baxter edition. What's not to love? What? Come on. This is perfect. Now, just imagine getting this Flash comic, which so happens to be one of my very first comic books ever. This run, this Carmine Infantino 80s stuff. And just getting this cool backup. Like, who is Keith Giffen? Who's this guy? I think I kind of remember him. Imagine being a kid getting this off the stands. You have the memory of a goldfish. You just don't remember anything that happened 6 months ago, let alone 3 years. Keith Giffen had been gone from the stands, and his his positioning in the stands, on the stands, is important to him. You know, he would eventually make that clear, and you have to put yourself in a fan's position of just coming across this stuff in dribs and drabs and just falling in love with it. I mean, look at this. It's hypnotic. Look at that. Look at this color hold, early color hold. Now this backup series is going to be good for that. It's going to be good for the color holds. Got a couple more. I mean, he drew a bunch. He drew a bunch of backups, but Larry Malstead bringing it. Martin Pasco still bringing it. But look at all these vertical panels. Again, body horror, vertical panels, color holds. He's going off. That looks like destruction. I'll be honest. I have no idea what's going on there. But still, it's beautiful. I mean, great panel. I mean, great composition all around. This is just hyper-inspired stuff. You can't get any better than this in terms of a young dude still like coming back. What is it, like 1983 or something? He's in his mid-20s. No, he's 30. He's 30. Yeah, this is 82, 83. He must be 30. 82. He was born in 52. Keith Ian Giffen was born in 1952. So he was 30 years old when drawing these Dr. Fate backups. And that's what these are. They were all collected here. I mean, good Lord. Look at this. I love these dense, bizarro comics. They look so great to me. And the fact that it's well written, it's a cool story, you know. I like Martin Pasco. He's a great writer. He took over the Black Hawk series in the 80s, late 80s. He's a great writer, underrated writer. Again, more backups or short stories, as it were. You find some really cool gems in here. I mean, this is some early Trevor Von Eden on the right. And here's a one-pager from Keith Giffen. Very moody, nice castle, nice shadows. Pretty effective. Is this who I think it is? No, it's Rick Estrada. I thought it was Dan Spiegel for a second. Dan Spiegel, don't get me started. I love that guy. Love him. You find him in all these kind of books all the time. Where's Keith Giffen? There we go. All right, so this is like a bizarro version of, yeah, Keith Giffen doing full art. It's like a weirdo version of Kirby by way of Simon, by Joe Simon being the inker. It's got that golden age style. Again, just for a quick story, no big deal. This is his first Legion of Superheroes comics. That is important. That is paramount. It is what got him the gig moving forward. Pat Broderick was the usual artist. I think he drew the first few issues of this arc. And Keith got the backup. You know, again, he was getting backups of all this stuff. He kicked ass on the Dr. Fate backups. So the same editor, Mike Barr, writer, Batman writer, Maze Agency writer, Mike Barr, Outsiders creator, Mike W. Barr, was the editor of this book. Gave it to Keith. Tried him out. And I want to say, yeah, Larry Malstead. I mean, they're like John Byrne and Terry Austin, or Frank Miller and Klaus Janson. They're that, or, you know, John Romita Jr. and Bob Layton. They're that team, an iconic team. I mean, it just worked so well. And it's only a backup in a pretty successful book. I mean, I think this was, I don't know if it was one of their top sellers, but it was a popular book. It was a book. Oh, and I forgot this one, because we are going in an order of publication. So this kind of came out afterwards. Look at this Ditko. Again, you get some weirdo Ditko comics back here where he just inks himself and there's a rat ghost haunting this dude. Where else are you going to get that? What other art form are you going to get that in? Keith Giffen, Gary Martin inks. Pretty cool. Pretty cool. You know, got a weird monster, lots of shadow, very, very EC. This big-headed dude, weird proportion. I don't know, strange sort of gotcha ending. But hey, I'm keeping this one. You know, I'm keeping all of them. Now this I got. I'm gonna share this with you. This Legion Outpost. Legion Outpost was a very early fanzine. It was an APA, you know, where fans would just trade articles and pages. There was a very specific process to this stuff. But anyway, this is a very early fanzine, Legion Outpost. They are impossible to find. But this book by Tomorrows collects what is supposed to be the very first Keith Giffen interview that was lost. The person who transcribed it or who did it, the interviewer, lost the tape or something was wrong with the tape. Decades later, it was unearthed and mastered and actually transcribed. And it was published here in this best of. So it was supposed to come out in one of the early issues, or not the early issues, but of that period of Legion Outpost. But it only exists here. So, but it was conducted back when he started. So it was right when he got the job, and you could kind of tell that he's very enthusiastic. He finally has something he could sink his teeth into. It had, in terms of artwork, it just has a couple of body shots here and there, a couple of future, there's that Defenders 50 iconic double splash page. But it's just curious because Keith Giffen seems to be very, not lighthearted, but very joyful and energetic in his future, in his status as a cartoonist and working professional. He's very happy to be here. He's just glad that he got given that second chance, and he's not going to mess it up. He talks about the potential that he sees in the Legion. He was a fan. I mean, look at him. Look, he's got hair. Look at that. He's got hair. Look at him here with the interviewer, Mike Flynn and Keith Giffen smiling. Amazing. Talk about a rarity. I mean, that's incredible. So this was around the time of that issue that I just showed you. But really, it's, again, Pat Broderick. It's not like Keith Giffen took over immediately, but he was sort of upstaging the main event. You know what I mean? Like, come on. This is just, I mean, if you could draw this now and I'd be blown away, and it would blow everyone away. I mean, it's just, I don't know if it's Drulier inspired or what. I don't know. I don't care. This is fucking awesome. This is so cool. He's doing his it's almost like he's developing a more sophisticated, or not quite sophisticated yet. Right now, you're seeing him be a little bit more editorial in his approach of design. Not to say measured, but he's not like going nuts for nuts' sake, right? Now, I believe this is Bruce Patterson inking. Yes, it went back to Bruce Patterson. You know, Bruce Patterson really had a huge hand in this, I bet. He had to. I'm leaving this up here, by the way, just because I like looking at it. Just for comparison's sake, in this issue of Comics Interview, I do want to show the black and white version. Black and white version of this drawing. Again, it's not really, no, it's not a horse at all, but it is just interesting to see. It's just cool to see the black and white version of this stuff. I don't think it's taken from I think this is a photocopy of an actual colored piece. I don't think this is taken from the original art, but I thought it was worth sharing. All right, so before we go into full-on Legion, there's one more flash, and that's at last Dr. Fate issue. Yeah, that's the splash we saw earlier. Just, he did 4 stories. I mean, oh, my goodness. He did 4 of these, 8 pages each, 32 pages. He had 32 pages to impress the world and the editors to hire him. And that is why that is so compelling to me as a story, as a story of an artist breaking in and staying in and fighting for your life. Wait, did I lie? Was this? Oh no, he didn't draw the inside. Oh, he did draw the inside. What am I talking about? That's right. This is the Steve Gerber. This gets published eventually in the 3rd issue of that reprint series. Oh, this is when he gets color hold crazy. That's right. That's right. Really fun stuff. Again, loss of gutter. That's going to be a staple. Very Ditko-esque. Makes sense. This is your Doctor Strange character, somewhat, even though he's a Golden Age character. There's also this, covered by the great late Ernie Colon. Also a collaborator of Keith's. He did this with Larry Malstead. Who was a peer, who was a contemporary. I think he, oh my God, just all color holds. He was his guy. Now, he never picked him. Keith never, according to him, he never picked an inker. All the inkers that he's had, he was assigned. And except the very, very last one. And we will get to that eventually. Well, yeah, this is where that one is. He drew that cover. We'll cover this at some future point. But see how rich this is? I mean, look at those colors pop. How could you... I don't know. How could you hate this? This is just such a weird candy-colored nightmare, which fits into this story. I mean, again, profile. Look at this trippiness. Double profile. Bleeding the cosmos from your eyes. This is a bad trip. This is a bad trip on paper. And again, I'm not sure if I don't know what his experience was, but I do know that he was a punk rocker. Keith Giffen was a punk rocker who was into Sham 69 and the Plasmatics and the Ramones. He was a punk rocker from Jersey. This is another flash from that same story. It looks good on newsprint too. I'm not going to lie. I like it in this original form. Oh, by the way, he also drew this cover. He hadn't drawn many covers up to this point, but he drew this cover. All right, so here we go. Let's get this out. And you know what? Let's do this for a minute. I want to switch it up and just really dominate this with Legion. Oh, one more flash. Jeez. When's it stop? Just kidding. This is beautiful. Beautiful. Look at this. This is recommended, and it's Steve Gerber, so you know it's going to be very well executed. I mean, Steve Gerber was one of the great writers. Everything he wrote was at the very least interesting and full of personality. He was a fantastic writer. Last flash, I promise. I organize these by, again, publication date, but really, I don't know if he drew these in that way. There's that double head. Man, that is cool. And that's actually really cool in that color approach too. that color treatment. All right, so here, oh, this is, all right. So, all right. So this is when he has a full issue. Let me see. No, he just has the main feature. He'll get full issues pretty soon. But he's got Bruce D. Patterson. You see the richness and detail. I mean, that is, admittedly a Bruce thing, but I mean, Keith is no slouch when it comes to this sort of elbow grease. You know what I mean? Like, he's just really loading these pages up with as much information as possible without making it dense, without making it impenetrable. You know what I mean? Like, it's just very specific in its world view. I mean, he is world building in his own way, and he's actually really exceptional at that. And that's something I want to examine moving forward, because even when he draws the least, he's still building a mood. He's still giving people and places character. And again, this is going to go back. This looks like Patterson. Yeah, Bruce D. Patterson with that heavy shadow application, color holds. See, the thing is, this thing with Legion of Superheroes is that it will be a fertile ground for him to employ a lot of different approaches, a lot of different styles, a lot of different just mark making techniques, whether it be in layouts or in design. The reason he took this and ran with it was because he saw the potential in like a place in the future where he could really design people's fashion and architecture and landscapes. And again, it's easier as an artist to kind of make it up on the spot than to have to reference specific things. That's a very real practical concern. And he was upfront about that too. But nonetheless, it's fun. It's fun stuff. This is a very soap opera issue. It's got lots of tears, lots of emotions, lots of crushes, lots of almost kissing. You know what I mean? So this is when the combination of that story element with Keith's hyper detailed art, that's kind of what took it to the next level. That combination was unbeatable. And it led to the Great Darkness Saga, which is their signature epic. X-Men have the Dark Phoenix Saga. This has the Great Darkness Saga. And again, you could see Keith not only, as claustrophobic as his stuff could be, he does give everything scope, the proper scope. He definitely doesn't skimp out on that. And, this story has thousands of characters. So it could be a job. It could be a chore to follow if you're new to it. If you're familiar with the stuff, it's still a lot. But I remember coming into this stuff not knowing a thing. And it took me a minute to really appreciate it. Being a Keith Giffen fan, I wanted to really know the Legion. And so I took it upon myself to just study it, to really treat it like homework in a weird way. There's their Doctor Strange character. By the way, this is a Mike Grell. This is taken from a Mike Grell cover, and he just repurposed it for his own cover. Inked by Frankie Okoye. That's odd. Larry Malstead is back, and I think he's not going anywhere. Inking the hell out of this with all those Zipatone patterns and color holds. This is a comic of its time, and to me that means it's timeless. But the 80s really, this Baxter, oh man, look at this. Just that profile. That's the big spoiler alert. I'm sure you all know this, but just in case, I will be talking about this pretty soon. That's a funny, very, very touching moment. That's a funny drawing, though. It got away from them. They can't all be perfect. Nice Dutch frontal. Lots of color holds. He's coming into his own. Look at that. That's a classic profile shot. A color hold and a profile, and that big cartoonish, sort of like Sam Keith level smile. Now, This came out right after this in terms of publication. This is the first annual of Legion of Superheroes. It's important because it's the first time he was credited as co-plotter. Keith Giffen, co-plotter. These nice stumpy legs. I love it. I love it. I love it. I love it. Don't get me wrong. I love it, but it's just funny. Oh man, so beautiful, so great. It's a big story. Again, lots of action, lots of color holds. But he co-plotted this thing, you know. This is the new version of Computo. I believe this is, yeah, Paul Levitz, of course. I think other people would go on to draw the whatchamacallit, the annuals. Oh, and before I move forward, you also do the covers to these adventure comics. You know, so Keith Giffen was in demand. He was a hot commodity. You know, he was called upon to be drawing these covers. Now, let's see. Also the back covers. These are very fun. I mean, a lot of the times they're just repurposing images from the interiors. Again, read this at your own peril. You will lose your eyesight. Or get readers or I don't know, risk it all. I don't know what to tell you. But it's pretty interesting to see Giffen kind of draw a scared Captain Marvel. That's pretty hilarious. Now this covers Ross Andrew, but the back cover he drew. Again, look at that sad Captain Marvel. Good Lord. Hilarious. But that's a Nick Cardy cover, for example, you know, so he's really just repurposing stuff. Again, Giacoya, that's a Neil Adams cover. That's a Nick Cardy cover. That's got to be him. That's got to be Giffen because it's a profile. Then this is a Legion specific book. It's no longer Adventure Comics, but it is a double cover, so it is cool to see. Again, this is me just buying stuff primarily for the cover. But in terms of Great Darkness Saga, he's really flexing right here. And he got an interview. He got a main interview in Amazing Heroes, which is one of the more popular comic book market magazines of its time, where that ran not only a checklist like Comic Reader did, but extensive interviews and great reviews and tons of great spot illustrations. I mean, look at that. That's great. I mean, the internet is essentially that now, but stuff like this doesn't exist any longer. You know, articles about characters or trends or specific checklists. But this is really cool because you get to see his artwork in black and white, especially all that Dr. Fate stuff. Like that. P.T. Barnum was right. Sell, sell, sell. Entertain, entertain, entertain. Another weird part in this interview is that he said that his mama didn't raise no clone. So I guess people had been leveling that criticism to him before about, you know, whether it be Kirby, probably primarily Kirby, or I don't know, George Perez or Starlin, who knows. But apparently that got into his ear to the point where he had to talk about it and dismiss it, you know. So that was just part of his time in comics, I guess. Unfortunately, it's just something he had to contend with. But now that we have the Great Darkness Saga, who gives a crap, right? Like, he's just telling a classic bone-breaking story with millions of characters. Look at this cover. I mean, this treatment is so good. I always love when artists letter their own stuff. Maybe I'm biased, but this sort of Eisner-esque treatment of a cover is always aces to me. I mean, it is, you could tell he inked it. That is him. Well, I don't know, but I think he inked this one too. Yeah, it just says Giffen. So he's taking all the credit. He drew the fucking thing. And so this always stood out to me. It's covers like this that made me be like, okay, I'm taking the plunge with Legion. I have to find out what this is. I don't care how dense it is. I have to figure this out, you know. And it was well worth it because I love Legion. It was a slow burn, but I'm now converted. I highly recommend it. This is the conclusion. Spoiler alert, it's Darkseid. They're all praying to him. They're all bending the knee to him. Oh man, more hand-drawn. Oh, I love this so much. Forgive me, but I'm so taken by it. Mesmerized. Great. I mean, as a visualist, he's really coming into his own already. The creation of Adam. Talk about a major swipe, huh? I mean, it's great. It's used to good effect, you know. So many tricks being employed here. Really great too. Yes. A rare angled profile shot. It's not a profile, it's a 3/4 angle shot. And some sound effects. This one has it all. I implore you to find this. Little funniness. That's a pretty good comedic beat story-wise. Like just that sort of quiet pause, punchline. Another joke. You know, just a sustained panel, which he will do in the future a lot. It will become a stylistic tick that he will make fun of himself for. This is is it? I believe it is. No, it's not. It is. It's the first Ambush Bug. I get it confused with the other DC Comics Presents, but this is Keith Giffen, inked by Sal Trapani. And this is the introduction of a villain that he just created called Ambush Bug. Where before he even first fully appears, he murders a dude. We never really talk about that because he's not an anti-hero, but he's Ambush Bug. He's like, who doesn't love Ambush Bug? Except he killed him. Maybe this is pre-Crisis Ambush Bug. I don't know if that matters. I love this awkward Superman pose. But again, this flying straight ahead shot, that's a Giffen thing. That's a Giffenism. There we go. Full shot of Ambush Bug. Just a green buff dude with a weird mask and a big smile. These in-jokes. We got Cerebus. Got a Fred Hembeck drawn Superman, which is probably drawn by Hembeck himself. You know, little Judge Dredd. So he's already expressing his fandom, right? So this coincides nicely with the boom of the direct market comic book stores. And so he's of the culture. He knows his stuff and he celebrates it with you. We have to keep this in mind when in the future he criticizes that, not only through his creations such as Lobo, but also his criticisms of the 90s boom. He really loves this stuff. He is a fan turned into a pro, essentially. And so this is just evidence that's I mean, he didn't have to do that. So he could be like, well, I just did it for fun, just to not bore myself. That's fine. But he didn't have to put Judge Dredd in a balloon. I think someone like Arthur Adams took that to the next level and just loaded backgrounds with tons of characters. But I'd say that this is, if not the first, it's a very early example of that sort of in-joke kind of thing. Real quick, we'll talk about this cover at some point, but this is the 89 reprint of the Great Darkness Saga, which also has this poster. This poster will be significant in the future. And by future, I mean pretty soon. In the story of Keith Giffen. We're almost wrapping up this first leg, but I also wanted to show a couple of covers. Again, let's make it all about the comics, you know. Let's see. World's Finest, The Flash, Batman, Superman, Supergirl. These are all very cool. I'm so happy that DC used to employ artists to do covers during this era. I think Ernie Colon did a bunch, Paris Collins did a bunch. They all had 1 or 2 covers with these marquee characters. Sometimes it's the only chance they got to draw those characters. I mean, there's a Ernie Colon vampire Batman cover. That's amazing. Keith Giffen also drew something for, let's see. Where is it? It's not long. It's like a brief period. It's a brief retro thing, very Kirby-esque. This almost looks like he drew it years prior, or maybe he really flexed his Kirby-ness from back in the day, but it looks like early Giffen. It doesn't look like 1982 Giffen. But listen, these 4 pages are worth the price of admission. I mean, cool cover. I believe that's Hannigan and Giordano. But back to Legion. This is when Legion is in peak form. This is really a hot seller. He only drew the bookends to this. This is a very famous pose that's been used to death. This definitely came before Crisis on Infinite Earths 7 with George Perez, but this came after John Byrne's Cyclops Dark Phoenix cover. And of course, it's been used in the 60s and the 50s and stuff, but it kind of had a moment in the sun again. Larry Malstead, Paul Levitz, Keith Giffen, keeping it steady. There's something also to be said about the consistent showing up on the stands with this level of quality. That's sort of the secret of the stuff. That's sort of like the it's not really a secret. It's underplayed, I think. Okay, so around this time, you got, is this Amethyst? Yeah, Amethyst. Amethyst is introduced, but also this is important because this is when Keith Giffen starts to expand. And we're just going to cover this quickly. Oh, here's a little extra. Green Lantern last page gag. A little Sinestro action in this random issue of Green Lantern. Again, he's employing his funny bone, right? But I want to show not only this promo for Legion of Superheroes 94, which, by the way, what an intense promo. Oh, yeah, and then there's also this cover I just showed you, but small. It's not much to look at, except it's cool to see it black and white, but it's not original art or anything, so... Oh, and you know what? He's still doing Legion. It's not like he stopped, right? It's not that he stopped. He was expanding, but it's still like you could still see his level of intensity and thought and consideration that he's giving all of his layouts. And he's co-plotting, so he cares. He gives a crap about this stuff. And, I mean, just fantastic visuals. I gotta say, I believe Cosmic Boy was his favorite. I think that's true. All right, so he now is working on Omega Men as well, at the same time as Legion of Superheroes. Omega Men is an offshoot of the Green Lantern, of Marv Wolfman's Green Lantern. I think Marv Wolfman created them, creator of the New Teen Titans with George Perez, but Omega Men was designed by Joe Staton, who we covered earlier. Keith Giffen took it and ran with Roger Slifer, again, of Defenders fame. So they had a history, again, on Baxter paper. This is incredible. Now, before going into the actual book, I do want to say this is the Flash comic I had as a kid, right? And this was an ad. So this is my first Keith Giffen ever. I had no idea what the Omega Men was. This was only an ad. I never saw any issues in Spain. which is where these comics are from. Ediciones 5. Ediciones 5. Omega Men 1. Then there's also, just for comparison's sake, there's also this poster, Leaders, Prisoners, Fugitives. It's pretty epic. It's pretty cool to compare. The art, obviously the details are sort of, they bleed out a little bit. There's also this interview by David Anthony Kraft. Keep that name in mind. Again, he's the one who wrote Defenders as well. So this was a pretty interesting interview. I mean, again, it's an early, rare, cool interview with Keith Giffen. You could see some sketches, some art in black and white. Doesn't want to be in front of the camera, of course. This is cool because this is like an early version of the team. And clearly it changed, but I think this is based more on the Joe Staton designs. And eventually got changed. Again, very weird, rare Giffen pencils. Now you'll see that image sort of modified here. So this is Comics Interview number 1, debut issue of that institution of comics. In Comics Journal number 75, covered by Kevin Nolan, you see this version, which was inked, and hair was added and costumes are changed. And I'll try to blow that up and show that, because it's curious to see the formation, the process of this stuff. Another example of this cover is, again, different sizes. I try to go big and go small. Colors are different. Your details are really dropped out. But this used to be a board for 3-packs that comics used to come in. That's how I got some of my early comics, in these 3-packs. And the Omega Men were still being promoted in a way. So anyway, the thing about the Omega Men is that it was super violent. It was hyper action, and it was bloody. I mean, it was also animals, but I mean, you got like cannibalistic or gross sort of, just, it's all very bloody. It's all very violent in a way that, you know, it showed like side boob. So again, it's not that it's adult per se, but it's more salacious in that regard. And some comics took advantage of that. They showed more sex, and by sex, I mean like in that way where they don't show anything, but they just suggest strongly, and lots of violence. And Keith Giffen got to flex his violent muscle in a way that he couldn't in Legion. You know, this was inked by Mike DiCarlo, I believe. Mike DiCarlo would have a fruitful relationship with him down the line. I was wrong. Yeah, Mike DiCarlo. I was right. All right. So just zooming along, because we're just going to get to the Omega Men and what happened afterwards. Again, he's doing Legion, same time as Omega Men. I like to see the splash pages. Those are always, for sure, one of the more interesting shots. I mean, it's just, I think this comic got called out in the journal as being super violent, along with other comics like Frank Miller's Ronin, maybe American Flag. Interestingly enough, Ronin is Keith Giffen's favorite Frank Miller comic. I'll see, here we go. That's where the Omega Men started, from Green Lantern to New Teen Titans. Oh yeah, at the same time we got this jam cover. He drew Cosmic Boy and Prody too. Whereas other people like George Perez or Howard Chaykin, this is a jam piece. Paris Cullins, Gil Kane, Jim Aparo, tons of people drew this. And then here's a little version. Where's Cosmic Boy? There he is. There he is. Wow, the ink is rubbing off on this stuff. I don't want to touch these too much. All right, so coming up though, there you go. Look at this. More Omega Men in black and white. And more Omega Men articles and interviews. Again, it was a hot book. It was a hot book when it came out. It got people talking. Now this is the big one. This is the first appearance of Lobo. Now you might remember that this was co-created by David Anthony Kraft. And it gets convoluted, it gets a little messy, but I'll try to keep it simple. Keith Giffen created Lobo in 10th grade. When they were working on Defenders, he got changed to Lunatic, that dude we saw in Defenders. But Keith Giffen designed him. Keith Giffen left. He went to DC, started working on Omega Men. They needed this character, or a character to become a bounty hunter. So he took his original idea for Lobo, called him Lobo instead of Lunatic. But those are his designs. So by all rights, Keith Giffen created Lobo. David Anthony Kraft feels like he was the co-creator of Lobo by way of Lunatic. And so he felt a little out of sorts with Lobo, especially Lobo's success, right? So it's pretty funny that they had, and he interviews him about this later on. There was no hard feelings really, but there was some weirdness. So it's interesting that he was in the first issue. Anyway, this is the first appearance of Lobo, which is one of the most expensive DC comics of this time. It's a wall book or whatever, but luckily I've had an issue, and so I get to compare it side by side to this. Let's see. You'll notice that the only difference really is the price of the cover. The $3.99 is the Facsimile edition that came out 2 years ago. This was out of print. This was never reprinted in full up until 2 years ago. And this one is the dollar edition. Now, I'm going to bring this one here. This is going to be the original. And instantly you'll see the color difference. And you will agree with me that this is the superior product. No offense to the hard work that went into reproducing this, but this, look at these colors, look at the printing. This will live forever. This Baxter paper, this Baxter edition of comics is the way comics should be produced to this day. That's just my editorializing. But I mean, look at this. I mean, look at the Zipatone dropping out and it just becomes like mud, So that's not great. Otherwise, it's a pretty good copy. I mean, look at the yellows. I mean, that's really vibrant, which fits the mood and the subject matter. And this is just kind of muddy. But if this is all I had, I'd be happy with it because we at least get to see artwork. Because again, this was not printed at all up until recently. And so again, it is very dense, very violent. This Fred Hembeck stand-in, or that is Fred Hembeck essentially, who gets murdered. And I think Fred had a laugh at that, I think. I'm not sure. Classic Giffen smile. That's Lobo. You see him in his disco suit for the first time. Hilarity ensues. Very violent. This friend of his cohort, rips this character's wings off. It's all super gross. And then this is a great last page. It's iconic. Well, it's iconic to me. Maybe it's not strictly iconic in that many people know it, but it is unforgettable. Now, parts of this were reprinted in the 90s. In 91, this slipcase collection this was an interesting collection of just random, of every appearance of Lobo to that date, but told in a story that's bookended by several artists. So Wait, it's not this book. Sorry, it's this book. Yeah, Greatest Hits. So it starts off with like an Eric Larson drawing, which funnily enough, Eric Larson was supposed to do Lobo instead of Savage Dragon. But, you know, Image happened. So what it does, it's an anthology book, and all we get are 6 pages from that Omega Man number 3. You know, the pertinent Lobo pages. So that's all I knew for a long time until I got the original, which took a minute, which is why I thought it was worth mentioning the price point, because it's not a casual buy. Keith Giffen in 89, 90, 91, I believe this came out, did these new pages. We'll be revisiting this when the time comes, because again, we're following his style as it progresses. And so that was Omega Man 3. He doesn't do that much more. Oh yeah, I wanted to show this real quick. This is his Final Adventure Comics cover, I believe, issue 500. He might have a couple more. I could be wrong about that, but this is pretty fun. It's just the old team and the new team lined up. I'll put that there because I just enjoy looking at it so much. All right, but I promised you the end, and the end we will have one more short story, which is really just 2 pages, written by Robin Snyder and inked by Ernie Colon. It's a war story. It doesn't look like old inventory. This looks like new Giffen-ism. And then this is the second Ambush Bug story, which also was reprinted in one of these. Again, the printing's not great on these small ones, but it's just interesting to see how it looks in this way. I also have this British version that came out a few years later, mostly a Justice League International reprint, but it reprints it in a larger size, and the ink is way crisper. Like, it's just way better. So it's fun to see in this size. But again, I do like the yellow newsprint approach. At this point, Ambush Bug is treated like the goofball character he was known for. He's no longer a villain. He's more of a nuisance. And people forgot that cold-blooded murder that he from that one issue, and that's fine. We don't talk about that. And that's how comics used to be. They don't, you don't really hold anything against anyone. You just kind of barrel through, and it's fine. This is highly recommended if you ever come across it. Just in general, just the presentation is really great, almost superior, but not like the Baxter comics though. This is curious. This Flash issue has a backup story. Well, Flash started running backups starring the Creeper. It had Dr. Fate at one point, and then it eventually had the Creeper. Dave Gibbons drew a couple, and Chuck Patton drew a couple, which was supposed to go to Keith Giffen. Keith Giffen was supposed to be the artist to this backup, but he did manage to draw the last page of this final backup, which promises a Creeper maxi series by Keith Giffen. And that has a long story of almost happened. It almost happened several times. But here we have Legion, Omega Men, Legion, Omega Men, Legion, Omega Men, Legion Annual. He only drew the cover. This is Dave Gibbons. This is a Dave Gibbons story, but he drew the cover. But that's it. After this Omega Men, that's all. That's all he did. He would never touch them. Well, he did. They did show up in Invasion, which is not to jump ahead too far, but he was the architect of that huge DC property event, and the Omega Men kind of are featured in that. Again, this is all great. He's not like Mike DiCarlo doing his thing. he's still going strong on Legion. He doesn't seem to be getting bored. Double profiles, making a weird tangent, but I'm here for it. It's great. Great stuff. Great Emerald Empress. His take on Emerald Empress is always fascinating, always very inspired. Again, superhero violence is great. So it's not as bloody as the Omega Men, but it's still very action-packed. Maybe he was being overworked and he was starting to feel it. You know, this is a good example of like, you're just opening up a little bit. You're letting the page breathe, but it's probably easier to draw than that. And by easy, I don't mean what's being drawn, but just the amount of information that you have to put in. It's a lot. It's a lot. And so there are tricks that you learn on how to get around that, you know, big group shot, lots of rubble, open space, open air, no backgrounds, you know, extreme close-ups. These are all tricks. They're all good, solid, honest tricks to just get you through that deadline. Because again, you just have to get the comic done. Doesn't matter what new trick you learned. You try to pull it off, and if you can, amazing. But it has to get done. Look at this super weird alien violent. Rare that they show blood in red. That's usually for the Baxter paper. Now, by Baxter paper, what I mean by that, if you're unfamiliar, is that this was sold in newsstands, 7-Elevens, supermarkets, whatever. These were more expensive, printed on higher quality, and were sold at comic book stores when they started becoming a thing in the early 80s. And so Marvel and DC both made comics primarily for, not primarily, but specifically for the direct market. That's what they called them. That's what we still call it. And this has this little 2-page, it's sort of an ad for what's coming, which is really from here. And these are wonderful. These are free samplers. Great double cover by Ed Hannigan and Dig Giordano. You get Jerry Ordway pieces. You got all sorts of pieces. Ernie Cologne. And this is the Keith Giffen one. Now, it's trying to be funny. It's trying to show how the range of themes and approaches that the Legion encompasses, whether it be humor or detective or love, romance. It has it all. And that's what he's trying to show you with this. So I am sure that Paul Levitz wrote this. Maybe he didn't. Maybe it was just left to Giffen. But this, speaking of Amethyst and Ernie Cologne, this was drawn by Alex Saviuk, but it was the first time that Keith Giffen was listed as art consultant, whatever that means. So I asked Alex Saviuk, and he said that it's pretty much just layouts. Keith Giffen sent them layouts, and he drew those. He went from his layouts. So again, I don't think they were that detailed. It's just like stick figures probably. But I think this is interesting and important because this would become a thing that pretty much only Keith Giffen did for a long while. And he's one of the few whose layout style is identifiable pretty readily. Oh yeah, and he drew this cover for Supergirl starring Ambush Bug, inked by Bob Oskner. Of course, these are all Jose Luis Garcia Lopez swipes, but that's the gag. That's the gag. Okay. Last few issues. Oh, and then this. Yeah, one of these issues got reprinted here. Violet's story. That's right, Violet's story. Look how tiny this is. I mean, it's so charming with this fantastic Paris Cullens cover. It's so good, but good Lord. It's interesting to show the size, the scope, or the scale of this stuff, but I mean, honestly, it's unreadable. Okay, last few issues of his run, and I'll tell you why that's significant. Oh man, great. He hasn't lost his touch. I mean, that's straight out of Omega Man, straight out of his earlier work. Just super gnarly body horror type mixed in with romance. Look at that kid's hard to pull off, especially when it's shrouded in Zipatone, but they gave it a go. Amazing stuff. All right, here we go. Oh, he just drew the bookends. I think this was Kurt Swan, middle, but not the bookends. He drew a couple pages. Keith Giffen did. It's mostly very designy stuff like this. Okay, but the reason these issues are significant in his timeline is because, and I'll show you right now, I'm going to have to get out of the way for this one here. This is the image that broke him. He drew this poster. This is the infamous poster. Now, it's not going to fit here because it's just so huge, but I will try to go bit by bit. This is the famous poster, which you will see is super long, endless, really. It's the poster where he drew every single character, Legion character ever, in one shot. And he, I'm going to try to get it in as much as I possibly could. There you go. Giffen and Malstead. He burnt out from this, folks. This did it for him. After this, he couldn't draw the Legion any longer. And he tried, but this did it for him. This is the thing. Again, I could have just been happy showing you the smaller version in that collected edition, but I wanted to show you up close the real deal. You know, it's a beautiful thing. I mean, it's funny because he's not really employing any show-off technique. It's really just a bunch of random figures. Sort of like one of those Who's Who covers. You know, there's let's see if I could just lay it down. I'm trying to show it off. Yeah, it's about as far as it goes. You're almost there. Yeah. It's impressive, but it was a lot. It was a lot. And so with this, he was like, I'm over it. I'm done. And then that began his next stint as a creator, you know. After that, it was like he did a lot. He did a lot, but for now, we could just say that this killed his interest in Legion, or maybe not killed it. It just it maimed it. You know, it put it on the. It just put it on the back burner for not too long, because he would do a lot of great work with the Legion. As soon as we'll talk about it next time. I mean, really, I think this is good for like the first segment. I have 6 segments planned. And this was the first, so that's 5 more. That's how math works. And so in the next time, there's going to be a lot. I'm going to unpack a lot. I mean, like I said, I tried to have every single thing that's been published by him, no matter how big or small. And I wanted to put it under examination. I want to talk about it. I want to sort of see how it progresses, how his style evolved. I think that's important. I think it's also important to sort of note what was going around him, around his peers, what the trends were, what fell out of favor. All that stuff is endlessly fascinating to me. And I'm fortunate to be able to do this through the filter of Keith Giffen, whose body of work is just so massive. It lends itself, again, to this sort of study. So thank you so much for sticking around. I could talk about this all day, and I will. So see you next time at the Fiffe Files.